Okay.
Okay, that's the target.
All right. Welcome, everyone. I think we may have some other people joining soon, but let's go ahead and get started. I'm Carol coming at you from Taos, and we'll do other introductions in a minute, but our esteemed guest today is Rabbi Gideon Estes, and I'm really excited to have a good conversation tonight, and I'm happy to see everyone's face. So as usual, we're going to start with introductions and just a quick icebreaker. The icebreaker is just meant um, to just be a real quick thing to just help us get to know each other a little bit and kind of loosen up. And so Marco chose the icebreaker for tonight, and the question is your favorite animal. So I will start. I'm Carol, she, her, and my favorite animal, I'm just gonna say a dog.
Okay.
Just your name and pronouns.
I am
Uh-huh.
Michael and he am but cause I can keep I gotta keep Michael.
But what's your favorite animal?
Mikey.
A monkey. And I think that's very apt for him.
Okay, I'd like to go next, Carol. I'm Reverend
Okay.
Denise Junius. I'm Reverend Denise Junius, and my pronouns are she, her. And like Marco, my favorite animal is monkey because I'm an avid Curious George collector.
Okay. How about Monique? You've been waiting the longest.
I'm Monique and I'm she, they, and my favorite animal is the horse.
Nice. Kreger?
My name is Kreger. Pronouns are he, they, and my favorite animal is the Holstein cow, as I grew up in Wisconsin.
Oh, sweet. Mona?
To say dog. Oh, Mona, she, her.
Okay. And Rabbi Estes?
Hi, I'm Rabbi Gideon Estes, and the favorite animal that I have right now is the humble trash panda, aka raccoon, because I have a stuffed raccoon that I won at Circus Circus that I really like, named Bandito.
Hey. Suzette?
I'm Suzette and I'm a she, her. And I would say dogs are my favorite animal, but they do not think they're animals. They think they're humans, or at least mine do. So I have to go with my goats because that, you guys know I'm a newfound goat herder out here in the country. So I'm gonna do my best with making them love me back. So,
All right. Would you introduce Rabbi Gideon Estes to us, please?
yes. Greetings to Rabbi Gideon Estes. Rabbi Estes is a spiritual leader of Congregation Orimi in West Houston. Rabbi Estes is the first rabbi to serve in Houston as openly gay. He came out in 2015. Rabbi Estes is a native of the San Francisco Bay Area. He received his BA in Jewish Studies from UCLA in 2003. He was ordained in 2010 at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City. Additionally, he received a master's in Jewish Studies from the Jewish Theological Seminary. Rabbi Estes is committed to interfaith work and has been involved in all types of dialogue since he was a child. Currently, Rabbi Estes serves on the executive committee of the Rabbinical Assembly, the International Organization of Conservative Masorti Rabbis. He is the immediate past president of the Houston Rabbinical Association. Greetings and welcome, Rabbi Estes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
We're very happy to have you here.
It's my pleasure.
Wonderful. Let's just start by telling us a little bit about where you grew up and the inspiration behind becoming a rabbi.
Okay. So, yeah, Gideon, he, him. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, in a small town called Pinole, which is about 15 minutes northeast of Berkeley. Um, I grew up affiliated with the Reform movement. That's the synagogue that I was bar mitzvahed in. But we had some challenges, and we left there after my bar mitzvah, and would go to high holiday services that were more of the conservative style. Conservative, which is the name of my denomination, is a bit of a misnomer. It was named in the 19th century. Has nothing to do with modern conservatism. It was a name that was trying to conserve tradition in terms of like keeping Hebrew practice. I call it traditional Judaism without turning your brain off, because it embraces it's fully egalitarian and accepting, and but also we maintain the dietary laws, for example, and the Jewish legal practice. But I'll get more into that later. So for me, like my path to the rabbinate really happened mostly in college. I'd heard a rumor, which was not true, that it's easier to get into UCLA with a non-competitive major. So I applied to UCLA with as a Jewish studies major, considering that I was the Jewish studies major of the class of 2003 at UCLA. It was not that competitive a major. I graduated both the top and bottom of my major, and within the top 2 of my department. I don't know which position, but yeah. So, the real thing as to why I kept my major is that when I went to my orientation in college before my freshman year, I was learning what the requirements were for the major. I was like, wait, to the advisor, you mean to tell me all these things that I would want to take as electives, those are my requirements? So I stayed as a Jewish studies major. While I was in college, I was very active in Hillel on campus and in Jewish life. And I did a program the summer after my junior year called Lishma. Lishma is Hebrew for the sake of itself. There's a value in Judaism of studying Torah Lishma, which is studying Torah not for any other goal, but other than just studying itself. So study for the sake of study. And it was a program that a colleague of mine, who was a bit of a mentor, had created while he was a rabbinical student. And it was this intense yeshiva study, egalitarian yeshiva study program for 18 to 26-year-olds. It took place at a Jewish summer camp that was for kids, but it was kind of like a camp within the camp. And I loved it. It was my first time living a life to the rhythms of a Jewish observant life. And that was like transformational for me, and also doing some deep study. And I really liked it. And one Saturday afternoon, as I saw the camp would do what's called limud, which is Hebrew for study, they would sit by tent or by bunk, and they would all be learning Pirkei Avot, which is a tractate of Mishnah, of Jewish law that had this teaching. They were all learning it together. And I had this realization, and I said to God that I think what I want to do with my life is help keep this going, and this being Jewish continuity. And I think the way that I can best do that is as a rabbi. And so that's really where like I kind of cemented the idea for me, like the summer before my junior year, that really I was probably going to go to rabbinical school. I was still very active in I was very active in college, and I would help lead services at times. And then I took a year off after college, and that's when I was living in Pico Robertson, which is the Jewish neighborhood of Los Angeles, and living my life as a committed Jew. And that's also when I applied to rabbinical school. And then I started rabbinical school in fall of 2004. It was a 6-year process. I was ordained in 2010, and then came to Houston, and I've been serving my congregation since July of 2010. So that's basically my story about how I became a rabbi.
Wow.
So you chose you chose Houston, or Houston chose you, or
Houston
how
chose
does it-
me.
how
So
does it
the placement process in the conservative movement was a facilitated placement process, but ultimately each individual congregation hires a rabbi. There's like some rules about how you kind of get candidates, but I like to tell people that when I was searching for a pulpit, I was pretty sure I wanted to be a pulpit rabbi. I started in California and went east until I got back to California between the northern and southern pole. So I had a very limited, small search area. That's a joke.
I'm giggling.
I appreciate it. And I ended up getting this job here in Houston, and it I think was somewhat of kismet because I'm here 14 years later, and of the people that were of my ordination class, I'm the only person in the same job.
Wow, that's saying something. I'm sure that you've come across a lot of people misunderstanding things about Judaism and the role and your role as rabbi. What is there one or two things that you would most like people to know about Judaism and your role?
That's a good question. I would say that so uh, rabbi does mean teacher. And one of my major roles, in addition to like, being like the main clergy of the synagogue, is that I'm also like an expert in Jewish law. So in our tradition, rabbi is called, in Aramaic, the term is Mara Da'atra, which means master of the place, which is that I'm the halachic authority, which means I'm the expert on Jewish law for my synagogue. So if there's a little bit of a gray area, I'm the person who makes the decision and makes the call. Certain things for when it comes to like ritual policy, we have a ritual practices committee that we consult with, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it lies with me. So even if there was a majority vote of people wanting to eat bacon, it ain't gonna happen. So at least not in a conservative synagogue. And so that's one of the interesting things about what my role is not just a person who preaches and teaches, but also who helps interpret Jewish law. Yeah.
Interesting. You've already talked a little bit about that conservative doesn't quite mean the same thing. Of course, in Christian churches in the US, homosexuality has been a hot button topic for a long, long time, and is still very much condemned in many evangelical and conservative denominations. So you've already said that conservative doesn't mean the same thing. But I understand you were already a rabbi at your congregation when you publicly came out. How were you received?
So if you guys will indulge me, I'll share kind of in brief my coming out story. So when I applied to rabbinical school, you could not be openly gay and ordained a conservative rabbi. That decision has only been permitted since December of 2007, and really 2008 is really when it really happened. And I started rabbinical school in 2004. So that's one of the reasons that I had decided pretty early in college that I wanted to be a conservative rabbi. And so therefore, I didn't really open up myself to realize that I might be gay. I just kind of pushed it down and just thought, oh, I'm just really not really interested in dating, busy. I'm sure people can relate to that feeling. And so it's funny, the things in hindsight is I did like I worked in residential life at UCLA for many years. For not many years, for two of my 4 years, I worked in residential life and was also a leader my freshman year. So I did safe joint training probably like 3 different times, but could never bring myself to put the sticker on my door. Not because I didn't think I'd be very good at helping listening to people. It's because I still hadn't come out for my own self and worked through my own things. And I think that's the reason as to why I couldn't put the sign. Because I was very good at listening to people. It's one of the things that I do as a rabbi quite well, is listening and kind of pastoring and being kind of a pastor for people is actually one of my gifts. I believe that's my actual concentration in rabbinical school, was in pastoral care. And I spent one summer working as a hospital chaplain at a UMCPE at the UCLA Medical Center. But with that, I began questioning already a little bit more fervently my first year of rabbinical school. I had a roommate who was openly gay. He was in the education program at JTS, which you could be gay and in, as opposed to the rabbinic or cantorial schools. And so like I kind of shared with him about how I was questioning about my sexuality, and would talk a little bit about people, but it was all kept, you know, in the closet because you would be kicked out if you came out of the closet. Luckily, my denomination realized the error of its ways in 2007, and allowed for the permissibility. It was kind of complicated as they passed conflicting responses. The response is a Jewish legal opinion, one that said you couldn't be gay and a rabbi, and another one that said you could. And both were valid opinions, but it was up to each individual school in the movement to decide how they wanted to go. And that was the politicking part of it. And the ones in North America, within like a month after the decision, were accepting. And actually, one of my colleagues who was ordained in 2008 was the first ordainee to be openly gay. And then we had the following year a couple students that were admitted as the first students admitted that were openly gay. Prior to that, we'd had a policy of basically don't ask, don't tell while in rabbinical school. And then if you came out after you finished rabbinical school, you wouldn't be kicked out of the RA, which is our professional organization. So some people went through just closeted and then came out afterwards. For one person I know, he had this whole process where he went back into the closet for rabbinical school and then came out afterwards, and it was a little bit of pain. So, but we've done a lot of work to kind of help heal some of that pain. Hi, Monique. And made progress. And now I'm very happy to say that I help run the LGBTIQ plus rabbis affinity group of the Rabbinical Assembly. And we're like officially listed at conventions, and we had like 30 people that met for a breakfast at our last convention, which was a really powerful thing. Particularly for one of my colleagues who was one of the first to be out in the denomination, who had been like ridiculed by people at past conventions and now felt like welcomed and affirmed and celebrated, and were writing policy papers in support of LGBT issues as denomination and our social justice commission. So we've come a long way. My own personal coming out is, so I did the work of talking to a therapist, and actually with one through Jewish Family Services here, which led me to going to a coming out support group at the Montrose Center for adults kind of coming out. And I, through that process, came out to myself, learned to accept myself, came out to my family, and then began slowly coming out to some friends, following the coming out of a colleague of mine in Washington, D.C., who announced that he was getting divorced because he was gay and wanted to pursue relations with men. Inspired me to like kind of really be honest about my own self. And so I told my president of my synagogue. I then went to a conference of Jewish clergy. And then after that, I was even more empowered of knowing what I wanted to do. And that's when I decided I've got to tell my congregation. And I had an incredibly supportive president. And the way I told my congregation is I came out to the board. We had a special board meeting in April of 2015. It was my own Passover moment. And I told the board I struggled over the 30-second worth of speech that I wrote for that meeting more than a half an hour sermon. I speak twice a week, every week, not shy of talking to people. That little paragraph was very hard. And the immediate emotion of what I got from the members of my congregation was one of affirmation, acceptance, and celebration. And I had older woman, unfortunately now suffering from Alzheimer's, but she told me of like, you're a rabbi, we love you and we're here for you. And it was great. And I think there was like one or two families that might have left the synagogue when they heard, but oh well.
I bet there was a lot more that just came
and since then,
needed-
like I've
needed to
gotten
hear it.
other things of where we have a reputation of being an affirming and celebrating community. And my community's been great. There was a person that I was like nervous because she was a native Texan, she was in her 70s, she's now in her 80s. And she said, "Oh, you were there for me when my husband was like kind of suffering. Like, I don't care what you do in your bedroom."
Nice.
And no, it was a really great experience. And then shortly after that was the tragedy at the Pulse nightclub, and that was my first time preaching from my pulpit about like not just as a concerned kind of person, but of how it felt for me as a gay man of when seeing that hate. And that was because it was Shavuot, and I remember doing that and that was my first time addressing my congregation and kind of having that integration of self.
Wow. That's
And later on,
amazing.
I got featured in Outsmart a few years ago, and that was a really great thing. And happy to kind of be. And also,
I saw that article, and you were in a really cute, playful costume. You must have a very fun, playful side.
oh, I do, very much so.
That's awesome.
I have no problem being silly.
Awesome. Well, I guess Marco's kind of starting it out. I've got lots more questions, but I think this is a good time to kind of open it up to let other people ask questions. Are you going to ask again about, does he like the people?
May I?
Yeah.
Okay. I get you. You do like the people?
Does he like the people in his congregation?
Yeah,
I like to be with my congregation very much. Like I said, I've been there 14 years. It's a great community. Well, 13 and a half years plus.
Does anybody else want to ask a question or two?
I do.
I thought you would, Kreger.
I would like to ask if synagogues are experiencing the same kind of decline in like in-person attendance, after COVID that a lot of Christian churches have experienced. Has there been in your congregation in particular, and in your awareness of other synagogues, is attendance down?
So yes. Like COVID, changed the world a bit. We also did something which we didn't do before, which is that now we stream our services on Zoom, which is a complicated thing halachically, but once you take that genie out of the bottle, you can't put it back inside. But I know of some colleagues who've tried in their communities, but we're slowly getting closer back to pre-pandemic numbers, but it's been an effect, and I do know from other colleagues that it's a widespread phenomenon across houses of worship.
Is it complicated just because of why is it complicated?
The streaming, it has to do with interpretation of Jewish law and use of electricity and kind of transmitting things and how one uses certain technology on the Sabbath.
I see.
Okay.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
Okay.
Good copy.
I wanted to ask, Judaism and Christianity, as well as Islam, are all Abrahamic traditions, and so we have, similar origins, and we share Christianity and Judaism share some sacred texts. What I believe what we now refer to as the Hebrew Bible is known as the Tanakh, correct?
Yes.
And we have talked some about inclusive language in some of our previous sessions. And I understand you recommended this to Reverend Denise, so I got a copy of this the JPS Tanakh Gender Sensitive Edition.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. Do you use that in your congregation? And
Well, I personally use it. Like I refer to it at times when I'm looking for a translation. It's one of the translations that I consult. When we read the Torah, like it's in Hebrew, so it's gendered because Hebrew is a gendered language. What that translation, which is the newest translation by the Jewish Publication Society, which basically is the default translation for many Jews and was like the academic kind of thing. So the NJPS, which was the version before this one, was kind of like the academic standard of English translations. And the Jewish Publication Society, which is a rather old publication society that started in the 19th century out of Philadelphia, now partners with the University of Nebraska Press, they first had the 1917 translation of the Hebrew Bible, and then I think it was 89 was the NJPS. But if you read the introduction of that gender sensitive one, it talks about why they made the choices that they did. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And it's because we've come to a new paradigm, I think, in society of where we have a different sense of gender. And sometimes in the Hebrew, things could be, when they get translated, it's a stumbling block for people for understanding. So for me personally, and one of the things that I helped kind of change in my synagogue is I don't like referring to the divine with male pronouns or female pronouns. I don't really like using gendered pronouns for God because I believe God is all genders. And that what I found is that at times it can be jarring to hear God referred to as he or him. Well, I know for other people it's easier, but for me, like it doesn't. And like also Judaism does not believe in the divinity of Jesus. So there isn't like a man like that a lot of people see as the embodiment of God. We don't have such a thing. And also even things like Lord can be off-putting. So I'll use Adonai, which literally does mean my Lord or Lord in Hebrew. But because the Hebrew, it doesn't trigger the same way for a native English speaker. The way that Lord does is a very gendered kind of title. And I don't want things for the language to be limiting. And I think that we shouldn't be limiting of God. And so that's what I think is part of the choice of that new translation. For example, if you look up when it talks about that God created Adam from the Adamah, which means a human being from the ground, from the soil, this wanted to try to give that reading. And so it said that God made the human from the humus. Because humus is soil, and you can get like that pun, which you have in the Hebrew of Adam and Adamah, of human and humus. And also when God created Adam, the first person, the first being, it said male and female, he created them. That's what it says in the Hebrew. It has both genders. And so that's why there's a midrash in Judaism, a kind of filling in of the text that talks about how the initial Adam kind of was both male and female, and that the word for rib, tzad, that gets translated as rib, could also mean side. And so it was almost like this kind of Janus-like figure, and got split when God put Adam to rest, split, and that's where Eve came from. So it's kind of just like they're back to back and then facing each other, which is a much more inclusive idea than like, oh, I'm going to take part and grow the woman out of it. You know, it's a different thing of like maybe someone's conjoined and kind of split apart. So that's an interesting way of looking at it, but also I would say that that's the part. And for me also, if I refer to God as the King of Kings, like that's, it can cause you to go down a rabbit hole about gender that is distracting. So that's why I prefer to use a word like sovereign.
Yes. Yes. And some of the Hebrew names like are feminine in their origin, aren't they?
Sometimes, yes. But like also like, but Hebrew is like Spanish is a gendered language. And also like, so each noun has a gender, male or female, but it doesn't necessarily relate to the meaning. And I'll give the classic example. Generally speaking, dual noun body parts in Hebrew are feminine. So yad is hand, the plural is yadaim, which means two hands, and that's feminine. That's just the rule. So you'd say yad chazakah. It's actually one of the things referred to as God's strong hand. It's Passover coming up. We talk about God's outstretched arm, the strong hand, and a strong hand and an outstretched arm, like yad chazakah, zroa netuya. Zroa is also arm. This is extended arm. But the dual body part for breasts is shadaim, which is masculine, because that makes sense. So don't look for sense.
Okay. Well, you talked about Passover. You want to say a little bit more about that? And
Sure.
and also maybe in that context, you could say a little something about Seder.
Sure. So so the Passover is one of our three pilgrimage festivals. It's always held in the spring. This year we had a leap year, and that's why our Passover is so much later than Easter this year. Usually they're pretty close together, but we had a leap year, so that kind of screwed the calculating off. When we have a leap year, we add a month, which happens 7 out of every 19 years, but it's not a very regular kind of thing. But I digress. So Passover, we call it the Feast of Freedom, is the origin story of the Jewish people. So, and actually, we refer to the story of the Exodus and God taking us out of Egypt each week in our liturgy for the Sabbath. Each day in our daily liturgy, we read this litany. It's part of our daily liturgy that's said. And at all of the holidays again. But this is the main one of where we really celebrate it and we kind of reenact. And we have this idea that every person is supposed to see as if they themselves have been taken out of Egypt and that they were slaves in Egypt. So that kind of say it in the present tense that I was a slave in Egypt and God took me out and freed me, right? So it's we internalize the story, that the story is like it is the origin story of our people, but we relive it generation to generation. And then there's lots of interpretation. And the way that it got marked is initially when there was a temple, and also what the Israelites did in Egypt, kind of their first act of defiance as slaves, of kind of saying, we're going to be free now, is they, while slaves, said, no, we're going to take our own time. We're going to set a calendar and have this month, and then we're going to do this feast. And we're going to go ahead and take a lamb, we're going to slaughter it, and we're going to smear blood on our doorposts, and then we're going to roast it, and then we're going to eat it, and then we're going to eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, with our sandals on our feet. And then the death of the firstborn happened. They got kicked out, and they quickly scurried off, and then had the splitting of the sea, and made it into Sinai. And then the sea closed in on Pharaoh and Pharaoh's forces. So we remember that miracle, and then we retell it year after year after year. What happened is, after the destruction of the temple in 70 CE by the Romans, the rabbis who kind of helped create modern Judaism, which is rabbinic Judaism, said, okay, we need to do something. We don't have a temple anymore, so we can't sacrifice a lamb, because we only sacrifice animals at the temple, and we don't have a temple, so what are we going to do? So instead, what they did is they said, okay, let's take this ritualized meal idea of us all coming together for a meal, either as a family or people that don't have quite enough as a family, you kind of join together a few families, and we're going to make it a ritualized meal. And they were somewhat influenced by the Greek symposia feast, which was the style of how you did banquets in Hellenistic society. And we came up with this idea of, like, with questions and answers and discussion, and we retell the story through symbolism of certain foods and certain rituals, and over 4 glasses of wine and a festive meal, and where it's designed to be a table fellowship. It's designed to do things differently, to get kids to ask questions, and it's a night of questions, and it's a beautiful thing. A lot of people believe that the Last Supper of Jesus was during the feast of Passover, so it was similar to a Seder. It's a matter of faith whether actually Seders are doing done. It was at least the Paschal meal. It wasn't quite the Seder that we do, probably, if we're historically accurate.
Because it started later, right?
Exactly, because it was developed by the
Christ
rabbis after the destruction of the temple. We had some things of it, of where we had a meal, of where we had Pesach matzah maror, of where you had the Paschal lamb, unleavened bread, and the bitter herb that were eaten together. And we know from Hillel that they were eaten together as a sandwich. You eat them separately and also together, of where they had roasted lamb. But the expanding of that ritual and allowing more things. So now there's the 15 signposts of the Seder. There's a Haggadah. I have dozens in my office. There's one that we use in my congregation. Here's another one that I just bought recently, and another one. And over there, my top shelf, I have about 30 others, all different. One of my last papers in college was about the art of Haggadot. So there's a lot. It's been around a long time, and people constantly innovate it, but also it's a beautiful blend of the universal and the particular. So through the lens of the particular, the story of the Israelites, we also think about universal suffering, but also it's our personal deliverance. So it's this pairing of both the personal and the individual and the particular, and kind of balancing that push-pull. It's also, we're mindful of one of the things that we say, that in every generation, there are going to be those who rise up to destroy us, which for members of my community, particularly this year, in light of what happened in Israel on October 7th, people are very mindful, and the 135 hostages that are still being held, and the massive amounts of life lost of innocence, which is always very tragic. People are very mindful of that, and it's not quite the same as it always was. But we know that Seders happened even in the camps during the Holocaust. People found ways. They would do it from memory, or they would kind of make they would do makeshift kind of things with their symbolic things. One thing, for example, is I know that there's a record of, during the Civil War, Jewish soldiers in the Union, when they were having, it was during Passover, is they put a brick on like their plate to remember the work of it, because that's what they had as the symbolism. So it's a way of also taking it and being aggressive. I'll share one really cool custom, which we have at my synagogue, which is that we put an orange on the Seder plate. The orange on the Seder plate is a symbol for, it started out as a symbol particularly for queer people. There was a story that college students at Berkeley had asked this Rebbitzin about like, oh, what about like, what does it mean to be gay? And like, there are those in the more strict movements of Judaism that are not as accepting as my denomination or those to the left of me. And said, oh, what? Like, I don't understand what you're asking about what it is to be gay. That's like bread on a Seder plate. So bread is the ultimate forbidden item during Passover. So in the mind of this ultra-Orthodox wife of a rabbi, she said that she didn't comprehend like the existence of kind of like gay people, right? This was like a question I know some of us can know we've heard and kind of other people. It's like, it's just denial of self. And so what happened is in like kind of protest, a lot of these colleges started putting bread on their Seder plate. And Susanna Heschel, the daughter of Abraham Joshua Heschel, was at Wesleyan and saw people putting bread. And it's like, what's this? And they kind of told her the story and said, hey, what about instead of doing that, because that makes everything forbidden according to traditional Jewish law, put something else like an orange on the Seder plate, and to symbolize not just acceptance of gays and lesbians and all people, but all those who are marginalized in society and kind of forgotten about, whether it might be single people or people with disabilities, etc. The really funny thing is that people took this and first thought it was about women ordination, and that like there was like the false myth of that, like the idea of a woman on the bima, that's our pulpit kind of altar area, is like an orange on the Seder plate. And so people took it as a feminist symbol, but then that's what happens sometimes of where like a larger minority group that's larger than other men kind of subsumes and erases someone else. And so you had this whole thing of like resurrecting the original intent that it was actually for gays. And I actually like that it's actually explaining that it's actually for all those who are marginalized. And so I kind of teach both those stories, but that's why I always put an orange on my Seder plate.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful.
Is that universally recognized, or is that
It's
like
pretty widespread.
okay?
I wouldn't say universal, but widespread.
So it would be like we have people of all faiths that can come to resurrection, and I think putting an orange on a plate during that time would be a really great symbolism for those people. So I want to remember that in my head for when we have this time next year.
Yeah, though I will, just because Carol raised for me. I know there's a lot of churches that will have Passover Seders. And I will just be direct, like that is something that is less comfortable for Jews, because it feels like an appropriation by a majority culture. I have a great story of a friend of mine who's now a rabbi, who was in this process of recently converting to Judaism while we were in college, and his parents were supportive of him, got invited by friends like, oh, you should bring your son, we're having a Seder. And they were Messianic Jews, which is also known as Christians. And when they talked about the Afikomen, they said, oh, it's hidden away and then like rises back as if it's like Jesus, which is not our symbolism at all. Like someone could create that, but that's a different thing. That's their own ritual. It's not what Jews do. And so what I would instead encourage people is like, I'm very open to non-Jews being present at my Seders. So I welcome people. We welcome the stranger. That's one of the themes of the Seder, along with all who are hungry, let them come and eat. So we allow that. But I would say it's better to go to a Seder with a curiosity and learn than trying doing it yourself, because that feels appropriating. So that's my view as a rabbi of mainstream Judaism. But for example, like today, I was at the Jewish Federation in cooperation with Holocaust Museum Houston, the AJC, and the ADL and the JCC put on a community leaders, like multi-faith leaders and community leaders Seder. And so we did like a modified kind of Seder for people to kind of experience. It was a really nice experience, and gave people a little bit of a feel about what the Seder's like.
Oh, nice. What are some other ways that you see that we could build bridges between the Christian and Jewish communities?
So I think compassionate curiosity is always good. I think that genuinely being open and curious from a good place, right? Like not to like learn so we can subjugate, but to be like, oh, hey, I'm really curious about like what and why and what that means to you. And the same way that I am to like people of other things, like I want to learn. Like I'm not, Jews don't proselytize, so I don't try to get you to become a Jew. So generally, we don't like it if people proselytize to us. I know that that is a part of some people's faiths, but I would advocate against sharing the good news with Jews. You know, we have questions and we'll learn and we'll happen and go, but I never got this experience from Resurrection, but it's never a great opener of like I really love you and I'm just so sad that you're going to hell. And I know because I have dear friends who are very devout evangelicals, and they mean that with the most love possible. And to that, I embrace living here in the South now. Bless their hearts. But that's not like I think the best way. But I think the way to kind of is to actually have curiosity and come with questions the same way that all of you had today.
That's beautiful.
Other questions? We got like 9 more minutes.
Are there any nuances? Have you been to Israel?
Oh, many times.
So are there nuances in the way things are done at synagogue in Israel and versus how they're done here in Houston or anywhere else in the US? Or does the flow, is it like, okay, at 10:05 you do this and then, you know?
Yeah, so there are nuances. One, unfortunately, in Israel, there is no separation of church and state or synagogue and state. So the ultra-Orthodox have incredible power to do the less than ideal political system in Israel. So while there are, like my denomination does also exist in Israel, it does not have the same level of freedom and access. So for example, one of the few like liberal democracies of the world where I cannot perform a wedding is Israel, because I'm not recognized by all authorities as a rabbi, because of politics. But in a more technical level of where the differences are, there are certain rules that in the land of Israel, we have certain rulings, while in the US, we hold differently. So for example, for Passover, here in the diaspora outside the land of Israel, we have 2 days that we have a Seder. We have a first night Seder and a second night Seder. In Israel, they only have a Seder on the first night. The first and seventh day of Passover are holidays in Israel. And in the US, the first, second, seventh, and eighth day of Passover are holidays, because there's a second day of Galiot, of in the diaspora of the exile. So those are some of like the differences. That's where there's kind of technical things, but otherwise it's very similar for a lot of the ways of practice, particularly if you were to go to a conservative or reform synagogue in Israel, which they do exist. It's just they're not supported by the government the same way. Reverend Mona.
Yes, my question.
Sorry, you're breaking up. Do you mind saying that again?
My question is, have you seen biasness that may exist between people who were born into the Jewish religion or faith and people who convert to the Jewish faith? The reason why I say that is because in a mainline denomination of, let's say, the Catholic Church, there was a priest who differentiated between those who were born Catholic to those who were converted to Catholic. And so, which I found very annoying, because in his mind, he would give last rites. He had a priority of who he would go see. And his question was always, were they born Catholic? And I didn't know, and I had a friend of mine who converted to Judaism. So I didn't know if there was a biasness that existed within your faith tradition between those who were born into the faith and those who converted into the faith.
So officially there isn't. Are there some people who hold biases? Yes. Do I advocate against those biases? Yes. According to Jewish law, you're not allowed to remind a convert that they're a convert. And in fact, if anything, if there was a bias, it's more towards the convert because they've seen things that others haven't and taken on this obligation. So they go to places that people can't do. There's also a notion in Judaism is that the person who, like the sinner who makes repentance, can reach higher places than the person who is righteous their whole life because they just can't quite understand the same thing of like when you've messed up and then you kind of overcome that challenge. So there's sometimes a bias there. Also, we call people who choose to join the Jewish people, they're B'nai Abraham v'Sarah. So like they are the children of Abraham and Sarah. So like the main couple. So that's yichus. That's a good, like, you know, they got some powerful parents there. And so there's a lot to do against it. And so when there are some born Jews who have a bit of a bias against it, but I help challenge people on that. And we are very welcoming. I'm very blessed that I have been a part of either people studying with me or I've served on the rabbinic court that has helped make them a Jew of well over 100 people. And so it's a really nice thing. My father's a Jew by choice. And it's something that is really great. And I'm trying my best to be affirming of. Yes.
Hi. So it is Carol and I who are trying to embark on the journey of creating a more reach with our church, with our faith. And so we're embracing social media and embracing online things. How do you, with a faith that is so historical and so versed in tradition and ritual, how do you entice your young people to embrace the faith and stay with it? Do you encourage communications like this to share your faith? And how do you do outreach to people? I know you're not into conversions, but for those people who might be curious like we are, that we want to know more.
So one is so one thing which I think Zoom is really good for is adult ed, like what we're doing right now. I think that it's one of the best things for it. I don't think it's good for youth education with the exception of like one-on-one or two-on-one. I think that it's actually really good for that. But like I wouldn't say it for like a class of like 10 kids. That's not good. But for adult education, it's really great. And it has a way for making people stay connected. So I had a person that moved to Arizona and they still come to my monthly lunch and learns because it's on Zoom. And I think that that's amazing. What I do, so for young people, what I try to do is my goal for our religious school, we have a Sunday school and that also meets once a week for midweek Hebrew, is my goal with religious education, besides them getting ready for their bar bat mitzvah, is that they leave when they go off to college, that they have a love of Judaism. I want them to know the basic things like how to navigate a service, but have a love of their Judaism and of their identity and know how to go to ask more questions. So they know how to go to be a part of Hillel, which is the Jewish college, like kind of main voice, and really bring it home. So that's what I utilize. I think certain social media can be good for maintaining connection. But really my main kind of way of getting the message is by building relations. It's relational and kind of getting to know people. So I utilize the tools that are at my disposal. So I'll text with people, I have a Facebook page and I kind of talk about it. I do also let people know there's a great web resource that my denomination has created called exploringjudaism.org, which is a really good perspective of kind of saying that's from the conservative Masorti movement. Masorti is just Hebrew for traditional, but that's what we're called outside of the North America. And I would encourage people to check that out if you want to have a different perspective, because unfortunately a lot of the money goes because people think that the type of Judaism that's super visible in terms of like the black and white Judaism of Chabad or of Aish Torah is like the only level, and they are of the more to the right and tend to say things in black and white. And I would say when someone says something as black and white, it's much easier to say, right? Because it's this or that. And some people like that because, hey, it's easier. The same way as I think people have embraced certain types of extreme evangelicalism. It's like when someone will tell you what to think, it's much easier as opposed to when someone says to you, well, it's complicated. Yes and no. And here's the gray area. And if you really want to understand it, you got to read these books. But my goal is to get people not scared of nuance. Like I said, I really like my denomination because it's not about turning your brain off. I embrace biblical criticism and I can believe in complex theology that deals with paradoxes and contradictions, and that's okay. Also, I'm not afraid to say I don't know.
I think that's what we like about you. We can relate. So thank
But
you.
thank you guys very much for allowing me. I hope people enjoyed this, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
My
This
pleasure.
will be posted online after for general viewing, and I will send you the link.
Great, that's awesome.
That's wonderful. Rabbi, would you care to close us out in prayer?
Sure. Ribbon Shalom, Master of the Universe, I ask that you grant us peace and understanding, and may we build on the idea of having compassionate curiosity to learn from all people in all faiths and all walks of life, and to know Ezehu Chacham, Ish Melamed Lekol Adam, who is wise, as the Pirkei Avot teaches, one who learns from each person, and may we all be endowed with the skill to learn from everyone. Let us say, Amen.
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 Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Man,
All right.
Thank
you, Rabbi.
have a
you.
great night.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Beautiful. Okay.
We did it.